The wind swept across the station platform, carrying grit and the smell of coal smoke. The departing train wailed, long and mournful, as though echoing the sobs of the woman left standing there. Her dress, once white and hopeful, now looked grey under the dust. She clutched a worn trunk, her knuckles pale, her lips trembling. The crowd dispersed quickly, the way townsfolk do when they sense trouble that doesn't belong to them. Some muttered. Some glanced back with pity, or suspicion, or something colder. No one stepped forward. She lowered her head, shoulders shaking, tears falling unchecked. This was not how the letters had promised it would be. In those pages, she had been wanted, welcomed, chosen. But the man who wrote them was nowhere to be found. She was stranded, not a bride, only a spectacle. A boy's voice pierced the silence. "That's my mama." The words rang out sharp and certain, stopping a drunkard mid-step and snapping the heads of gossiping women. The boy couldn't have been more than 10, brown hair sticking out from under a battered hat, his boots too big for his small frame. He stood near a tall man with a weathered face and a frame built by hard labor. The man muttered under his breath, tugging the boy's shoulder, but the child broke free, marching toward the crying woman with a stubborn stride. She blinked through tears, startled. The boy stared up at her, eyes bright, unflinching. "Don't cry," he said. "You're my mama now." Laughter rippled through the few who lingered, cruel and amused. The tall man's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the boards. His voice was rough, edged with embarrassment. "Caleb. Enough." But the boy didn't back down. He reached for her trembling hand, wrapping his small fingers around hers. "You can come with us." The woman stared at the man, his broad shoulders, his sun-beaten skin, his wary eyes that seemed to measure everything. She searched his face for mercy, or for mockery. His expression gave neither, only restraint, as though the idea of helping her scraped against old wounds. The murmurs of the crowd sharpened. "Stray bride. No good comes of cast-offs." That poor man, saddled with a weeping woman. The man, Elias, she heard someone call him, let out a sigh that sounded like surrender. He tipped his hat lower over his brow. "Fine. I'll take you as far as the ranch road. After that, you'll figure your own way." She nodded, the motion small but desperate, relief washing through her like water on parched earth. He lifted her trunk as though it weighed nothing, slung it into the wagon, and gestured her aboard. Caleb grinned, climbing up beside her as if it were already settled. The wagon rattled along the dusty trail. Silence stretched, thick and awkward, broken only by the creak of wheels and the call of crows overhead. Caleb filled it now and then with questions she couldn't answer. Where had she come from? Did she know how to cook biscuits? Could she ride a horse? She tried to smile, tried to respond, but her throat was tight, and her mind still circled the shame of the station. Elias drove without looking at her, eyes fixed on the road. His presence was heavy, guarded. Every line of his body told her she was an intruder, tolerated only because his son had spoken out loud what no one else would. She wanted to thank him, but the words tangled in her chest. The sun was lowering by the time they reached the ranch. Fences sprawled wide, cattle grazing in fields that shimmered gold. Hands looked up from their work, pausing to stare as the wagon rolled in. Their faces carried the same mix she had seen at the station: curiosity, judgment, a hint of smirk. Elias barked an order for them to mind their business, but whispers carried anyway. Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of smoke and leather. Sparse, functional, and shadowed by neglect, it bore the mark of a place run by men alone. Caleb bounced on his heels. "She can stay in Mama's room." Elias stiffened. The silence that followed pressed against the walls. He shot his son a sharp look, then turned to the woman, his voice clipped. "One night. You'll leave tomorrow." Her chest tightened, but she managed to nod. It was more than she had expected at dawn, when the train left her behind like discarded freight. That evening, she busied herself with small tasks. She cooked what she could find in the kitchen, repaired a torn shirt she discovered draped over a chair, and even soothed a restless calf in the barn while Elias and his men argued about fencing. Each act felt like a plea to exist, to prove she wasn't a burden, to silence the whispers. Caleb beamed at every effort, praising her with unshaken conviction. Elias noticed but said nothing. His silence was a wall, thick and deliberate. Yet as night deepened and shadows stretched across the land, a different unease crept in. The ranch hands spoke low of strangers seen near the ridge, riders who weren't from around here. One muttered that trouble had been sniffing around ever since the train brought her. Elias told them to keep their eyes open, his tone sharper than usual. She lay awake on a borrowed bed, listening to the restless movements of the house, the wind clawing at the shutters. Caleb had whispered good night with the easy trust of a boy who believed the world was as simple as pointing at someone and calling her mother. Elias had said nothing when he left her at the door, but in his silence, she sensed a battle she couldn't name. The air outside shifted. Horses stamped nervously. A dog barked, then cut off. She sat up, heart hammering. Somewhere in the distance, a low whistle rose, a signal, deliberate, unsettling. She gripped the blanket, her body rigid. Perhaps the man who had lured her with promises hadn't finished with her after all. Perhaps the shame of abandonment was only the beginning. Tomorrow, Elias had said, she would leave. Tonight, something else was coming. Would you like me to carry this moment of suspense straight into section 2 with a night raid, or would you prefer a brief pause in the next section to deepen Elias's and Nora's inner reflections before the danger strikes? The whistle faded into the night, leaving the air heavy with dread. Nora rose from the bed, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, every sense straining. Outside, the dog barked again, frantic, before a sharp crack silenced it. She pressed a hand to her mouth, willing herself not to cry out. The sound of hooves came next, closer this time, their rhythm quick and aggressive. A crash shook the door of the bunkhouse. Men shouted, rough voices spitting curses. Elias's command rang out, sharp as a rifle shot. To arms! The ranch erupted in motion, boots thudding, horses neighing, iron clattering. Nora froze only a moment before instinct took her toward the barn. Caleb! The boy must be sleeping. She darted through the shadows, heart pounding, skirt snagging on splintered boards. She found him sitting up, wide-eyed, clutching the edge of his blanket. Stay down, she whispered, pulling him close. The barn door banged open. A masked rider peered inside, torchlight slicing through the dark. Nora pressed Caleb behind a stack of hay, her arms wrapping him tight. She groped blindly, her hand closing around the cold stock of a shotgun propped against the wall. The intruder stepped in, boot heels scraping. Nora raised the weapon, her hands trembling, and fired. The blast roared, echoing off the rafters. The rider cursed, stumbling back into the night, torch falling and sputtering in the dirt. Caleb gasped against her shoulder, but she held steady, her body vibrating with fear and defiance. Outside, the fight raged, gunshots, shouting, the hiss of fire. Elias's voice carried above it, steady, commanding, a man shaped by battles long past. Minutes stretched like hours before the night quieted, leaving smoke and the acrid sting of powder in the air. The attackers fled, their hoofbeats fading into the dark. Nora carried Caleb back toward the house, her steps unsteady. Elias stood near the porch, rifle in hand, shirt torn at the shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. His eyes found hers, surprise flickering at the sight of the shotgun clutched against her chest. You fired. His voice was rough, but not unkind. She nodded, breath still ragged. I had to. He studied her, the hard lines of his face softening. You did right. Caleb slipped from her arms, running to his father. She saved me, Pa. She's brave. His voice brimmed with pride, and for the first time, Elias did not correct him. Later, when the ranch quieted and the wounded were tended, they sat near the dying fire. The glow painted their faces in amber, shadows stretching long. Nora stared into the flames, words caught in her throat, until finally she let them spill. I wasn't supposed to be here, she whispered. The man who wrote me was already married. I didn't know until it was too late. His wife found the letters. Her brothers swore they'd ruin me, chase me from any place I tried to belong. I thought if I came far enough west, I could disappear. But they followed me. Elias said nothing at first. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the fire. His silence was heavy but thoughtful, not condemning. You're running from shame that isn't yours, he said at last. Her eyes stung. Shame clings whether it belongs or not. Caleb, curled beside her, spoke before Elias could. I don't care what they say. You're still my mama. His certainty cut through the night, simple and unshakable. Elias looked at the boy, then at her. A war waged quietly in his gaze, grief for the wife he had lost, fear of letting another soul too close, the stubbornness of a man who'd lived too long alone. Yet beneath it, something shifted, a crack in the armor. The following day brought whispers through town. Word of the raid spread, twisted into tales of scandal. Nora was branded trouble, a curse that brought violence. In the saloon, men muttered that she ought to leave before worse befell them all. The sheriff, pressed by the crowd, called for order, then turned to Elias. "She's not your responsibility. Let her go." The room held its breath. Elias set his glass down, stood slow and deliberate, and faced them. "She's under my roof," he said, voice carrying like iron. "She's under my protection. Any man that says otherwise can face me outside." A hush fell. Hands shifted near holsters, but none drew. Nora stood frozen by the door, the weight of his words heavier than any bullet. For the first time in her life, someone had claimed her not as a burden, not as a mistake, but as kin. That night, Caleb tugged her hand as though it had always belonged there. Elias lingered nearby, watchful, quieter than usual. When he finally spoke, his words were stripped of hardness. "You've got a place here, if you want it. Not because my boy insists. Because I do." She breathed in, slow and unsteady, the ache of years loosening in her chest. "I want it," she said, voice low but steady. Days turned into weeks. The ranch mended from the raid, fences rebuilt, cattle settled. Caleb's laughter rang across the yard as she taught him letters from a battered book, his tongue tripping over words. Elias watched from the porch, his eyes no longer guarded but softened with quiet pride. The land still bore its dangers, the town its whispers, but within the ranch's boundaries, she found a rhythm that felt like belonging. One evening, the sky burned orange with sunset, painting the fields in gold. Nora stood with Caleb at her side, Elias just behind, the three of them outlined against the horizon. For a moment, silence stretched, deep and full, before Elias spoke. "Family's not always chosen by blood," he said. "Sometimes it's chosen by a boy too stubborn to let go." Nora's hand tightened on Caleb's shoulder, her eyes shimmering. The boy grinned up at her, proud, certain, as though he'd known from the first moment at the station. She smiled back, heart steady for the first time in years. Whatever the world thought, whatever shadows still lingered, here she had been named, and claimed, and made whole. And though the story had begun with tears and silence, it ended in a truth no one could take from her. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. After all, some stories aren't just told, they're lived, and remembered in the hearts of those who dare to claim family where the world sees none.